is not Smooth Jazz Hour on your local radio station, but rather it is another episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And this is a pre-recorded interview, I should say. It's being recorded on Monday, February 5th, 2024. You're going to hear this next Monday, February 12th, 2024, day after the Super Bowl, of course. We'll see who have won by then. Of course, this is going to be after 301, so you'll have just heard the E-men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit with former Emergency Service Officer and current District Attorney Tom Ridges. So hope you enjoyed that episode. Of course, that's in the future. A couple sponsors to go through very quickly because my guest is a fast-moving lady, so I have to make sure I get her out of here in time. And the first thing is my consulting company.
Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company.
And of course, as always, if you need a PI, you got to go to my man, Bill Ryan.
The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast.
Okay, thanks to Bill. Let me introduce my next guest so she doesn't miss her train and kill me as a result. My next guest for over 20 years has been a presence in New York City. She's a Rutgers graduate. And if you're a longtime WPIX viewer, you remember her most from there. She was there 18 years, from 2000 until 2018. And she's had stints at iHeartRadio, CBS as well. And she's currently a correspondent for Bloomberg TV. It's nice to finally have her on the podcast because I watched her on PIX all those years. And that is Miss Lisa Mateo. Welcome, Lisa. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you for having me. What a great intro. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's been compared to a lot of different things. The best comparison I've ever heard is somebody compared it to turning down the lights and getting ready to spend a night with your old lady. You know, that's just one thing that's been thrown around. So I'll take it. There's been worse.
Take what we can get, right?
Exactly. But speaking of you, of course, before we get into your career, tell me, Lisa, where'd you grow up?
I was born in Brooklyn. I'm a Bay Ridge girl, and I lived there. Oh, I went to elementary school there. We took a quick hop to Staten Island, then came back to Brooklyn again. And then my family moved to New Jersey. And about when I was in middle school, like late middle school, going into high school, that's when I moved to New Jersey. But it's Brooklyn is in my heart. And then I have New Jersey because then I went to college in New Jersey at Rutgers. So I have a little bit of the best of both.
You and I both being Hispanic, me being half Dominican and half Puerto Rican, I wanted to ask you this. I believe you're Puerto Rican, but so did you have a bilingual household?
No, actually, we grew up. Both of my parents were born in Puerto Rico, and they grew up, speaking Spanish. But when they came here, they just, they spoke English in the home. They came here at a young age. They were raised in. My dad was raised in Bed-Stuy over in Brooklyn. My mom was raised in New York. So they basically grew up speaking English, going to school. And I don't know if it's something that my dad had, because when he came here, he was actually left back because of the language barrier. And I don't know if that kind of influenced him to not want us. But I think it was more of just that it was just easier for them, to talk English. And then that's why I took it up in school. It was my minor in college. And my grandmother, before she passed, she was the one and only that I would talk to all the time.
Yeah, same thing with me. It was my grandparents, both of whom have sadly since passed away, but it was the same thing. The reason why I wanted to make sure I picked it up and learned it is, besides what they would tell me, which is if you get a job someday, it's going to be very good. It's going to be very helpful, which is true. It's also so I could communicate with them better. because they could understand English, but they couldn't speak it back to me. So I'm like, you know what? Since I love them so much, I learned the Spanish. So that's we share that in common. That's actually a really
and it's
great
true. It
motivator.
does help, especially when you're covering stories like out in different neighborhoods in New York City, the most diverse city ever. It definitely came in handy.
Oh, of course, especially when I go and see my family in Washington Heights in the Bronx. So
Yeah.
it definitely plays a role. Where would you say the interest in media first began for you?
I think I always loved writing. And I used to keep like a journal as a kid. And then when I got to high school, they had the high school newspaper. So I played a lot of sports in high school. So I would write sometimes the sports recaps. Like that's how I started with the school newspaper. And then when I got to college, I just started writing for the college newspapers called the Daily Targum, and that's what I wrote for at Rutgers. And it was just a great experience because not only did I learn more about the university, I was able to still continue with my passion for writing. And that's how it went. My first job out of college was in newspapers. I was a local newspaper called Suburban Trends, and I went on from there to magazines until I finally got that bug for broadcast news.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that because at the time this is being recorded, like I said, this is a pre-recorded interview. We're talking with Lisa Mateo here in the Mike the New Haven podcast. I had just spoken with Kristen Shaughnessy, formerly of New York One, and she mentioned a similar background where it was writing for her. And before I started doing any of this, same thing with me, writing. It's amazing how many people that go on to have a background in visual media start off writing because it's really that enhances any other skill set you may acquire along the way because you have to paint a broader picture. You have to be more descriptive, and that attention to detail carries over so well.
It does. It does. And what piqued my interest, when that change shifted, I remember I was working for a newspaper and I was covering this fire, and I was, this was before, blogs and everything went online, everything, you had to actually pick up the newspaper. That was the thing, back then. So I remember I was running for the newspaper and I was at the fire and, everything's going on, it's an action-packed scene. And I remember being there and having my, I had an actual notebook and a pen and I was writing down notes and who I was talking to. And I was just sitting there saying, man, I wish I could tell somebody now, instead of going back, writing it up, and then waiting for the next day to read in the newspaper, because by then people already knew, what happened. So I would just get frustrated. And that's when I knew I wanted to tell the story live on the scene, like as it was happening, describe it, like, the flames, the heat from the flames, the people you're talking to, like bring them in live. And that's when I first got that bug, and I was able to fulfill that. Yeah, it was a dream. There was back in the day, there were different news stations. They would have these seminars and you would apply to go to this seminar. And it was basically a course in overall news. So you had, different parts, advertising. You would learn about the advertising business. You would learn about the news business. You would learn about all different aspects of it. And so I applied to be a part of that seminar. I got it accepted. And when I finished the seminar, that's when they were hiring for a brand new morning show. Back then it was the WB11 morning news, and they were just starting. And they were looking for, different people to come on board and help launch the show. And I was just starting. It was my first TV gig. And I left. I was working for a magazine at the time, and I decided to leave and take a pay cut and go and start and go after my dream. And that's what I did.
WB11, of course, would you see the newscast a lot back in the day after Met games and Yankee games too, but mostly Met games. And you got there in 2000, and that was a heck of a year to get there because speaking of the Mets, that was, and same thing I covered in my Shaughnessy interview, that was the year of hyper-localness, and that we got a Subway World Series between the Yankees and Mets. So here's a fun story. It's encompassing all of New York City, mainly Queens and the Bronx. I'm curious, did you cover that at all?
Well, that I was just starting out, so I did not, but I covered it because there were other different Subway series and things after that. And it was always a battle for me because I'm a big Yankees fan.
So am I. So am I.
You got to be biased, you can't be biased, and you got to kind of report each thing, evenly. And that was the biggest thing for me, like being from New York and reporting on the different teams. Like, I'm a Giants fan and I'm a Yankees fan and I'm a Knicks fan. There's other teams that you have to kind of report on too. But that was just some of the harder things that you have to remember when you're doing stories.
Oh yeah. Well, listen, we share that in common too. I'm Giants, Yankees, Knicks, and Rangers, and the Knicks and the Rangers
Oh,
are making me proud this year. So, hopefully we
good.
can have a
Yes,
good
the
spring.
next definitely.
Yeah, Knicks definitely for sure. So, within a year, and this is a somber note, but within a year after you get into PIX, we get 9/11. Now,
Sure.
there's stories that are big, and then there's the story. And it doesn't matter
Yes.
who you are. I think anybody that's been in the news business in New York City long enough that was around for that will tell you that no
Oh,
matter
yeah.
what they cover, that's the story of their career. What was your perspective and personal involvement as a reporter with September 11th?
Sure. At the time, I was a producer. And so when everything started unfolding as a producer, you're making phone calls. You're trying to figure out who people can talk to. You're down on the street trying to pull people so that your reporter has someone to talk to, when they're going live, and you're doing all this. But for me, it had more of a personal story because my husband worked a block away from the World Trade Center. So at the time, he was coming up, from his regular commute into the city, up in the subway. And I remember calling and you couldn't get in touch with anyone. All the cell phones are down. No one can get in contact with anyone or call anyone. And I remember I was trying to focus and make different phone calls and try and get in touch with people. And at the same time, I'm like, where's my husband? Like, I can't get in touch with him. I can't get hold of him. And he finally was able to walk. Basically, he walked from there all the way to WPIX Studios, which was at 42nd and 2nd. And he walked all the way down because we couldn't get in contact. And finally, I was able to take a breather because it was all this emotion, like build up from what was going on news-wise, but from what I was going through personally. Is he okay? I don't know what happened, because when he came up from the subway, all he saw, everything was dark and things were starting to fall, from the sky. He didn't know what was going on. And he just saw people running, so he ran. So it was a very personal experience too. But from that, my husband and I, we were thinking the one bright thing that came out of it for us is that we were thinking maybe, we were going to have kids. And it was that instance that, solidified that for us, like, let's start a family. And that's what it was for us. So it was a very personal and emotional time. But just learning how to, when you're covering a story, how to cover it, but we're real people, and we have real things going on in our lives at the same time. And sometimes it's hard to balance the two. And that was my biggest struggle with 9/11. But it was just an amazing experience to cover it, and to hear the different stories from everyone who was just walking around, sometimes just not knowing what was going on. And I think that was the biggest part of it, is just that struggle between the personal and the news aspect of it at the same time.
Yeah, it's good to get those stories. I mean, I'm 23, I'll be 24 in a few weeks, so I don't have a
Mhm.
vivid recollection myself. I was
Sure.
1 years old when it happened. But
Right,
on
right.
this show, I do a lot of police and fire interviews with NYPD and FDNY who were there for that.
Yeah.
And so it's good because, especially for this generation that doesn't have an experience of their own, you want to make sure you empathize, and you understand just what you guys went through at that time. Everybody was impacted differently, much like your generation understood what the folks who were around for Pearl Harbor went through. So, I always like asking that just to make sure that we get those different perspectives. So thank you for sharing that. Transitioning back to your career, there are moments in our career where no matter how good we may be at something, we all struggle with some form of imposter syndrome. Do I belong here? What am I
Sure.
going to do here? What can I accomplish here? What was the first story you covered where you felt like, you know what? Okay, I belong here.
Oh, wow. For I belong here. I think for me, it was because I was part of the community, and people gained that trust in me. And that was always my biggest fear, is that, well, people, are they going to trust what I say? Are they going to believe what I say? And why would they trust me? Why are they going to believe me? And I think that's the biggest thing we struggle with. And I remember it just happened often. I would go into different neighborhoods, and people would remember me. They'd say, like, "Hey, Lisa," like, "Hey, how's it going?" And it was a great feeling, because I was like, okay, like they trust my opinion. They trust my reporting. They're embracing me. I remember as you're a reporter, sometimes you have to go, and we call it a door knock, and you go and you have to knock on a neighbor's door of someone, maybe they didn't do something right or something happened to the neighbor next door. So you have to go on the next neighbor, knock on their door. And sometimes it's not the easiest predicament to be in. But I remember other stations going and knocking on this one neighbor's door and no one answered. And then I was like, well, let me try my luck. I went up and I knocked on the door, and the door wide open came open. And they were like, Lisa, how's it going? And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, hey, they're like, you want a cup of coffee? I was like, no, I'm good, but thanks. So can you tell me about it? And you're just going to go into it. But I think that's the biggest of your struggle is how do you gain that trust in the community? And I think it's about being a part of the community. Because I'm from, New York City. This is my home, and people, realize that, not only do I work here, I eat here, I hang out here. Like I go out into the neighborhoods where I report in, and that's where I learn more about it. I meet the people, I go out and I talk to people. It's not just about us doing a job and here's my story and here's it is and I'm done. No, like talk to the people, because you never know what other kind of story is lying underneath that. Maybe there's a little bit more to it. And I think another part is when I first came to Bloomberg, it was imposter syndrome. I mean, for me, I wasn't a business reporter, and they said, Lisa, you're a journalist and we know you can handle it. And they were so supportive. And I was always, this voice in the back of my head, like, Lisa, I don't know. I think you're in over your head on this one. And I just was able to, through different research, through taking courses here at Bloomberg that they have, I was able to learn so much. And not only that, the support from everyone who sits behind me, who's, my neighbor, my coworker, everyone was willing to help out and pitch in. But to have that, confidence from my boss and for letting me accept a position, knowing my background, it was just an amazing. But it's that imposter syndrome, like, am I good enough for this? And we all go through it, no matter how long you've been in the business. You go on a story and you're like, I don't know if I could do this, but you can, and you do.
And I love how you put that. Now, let's talk about that, because here you are after 18 years in one place where everybody's really gotten to know you. And there are certain reporters that are synonymous with the station to where
Sure.
when they leave, either to go somewhere else or they retire, it's like, a piece of your childhood's going away. I felt that when you left. I felt that when Tamsin Fidel recently left.
Yes.
It's a major thing. So for you, you could have stayed at PIX for the rest of your career, and I'm pretty sure been satisfied because you loved what you were doing there. But what was it that prompted you to say, after so much time, you know what, let me try something else?
I think it was after 18 years of local news, I think I was looking for something different. Where could I take my career next? Because I had already taken the story that really was like the pinpoint for me was when I was able to go to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria and go do reports, record, film, come back, produce it, put it into a half-hour special. Like, that was it. And when that was over, I was kind of like, okay, like that was my moment. Like, what else is out there? There's got to be more. And that's really what it was. So from there, like, I took a little bit of a break to decompress, because after so many years, you need to do a little decompression. And then I just decided, you know what, let me try different things. I tried radio, I started doing radio. I went to the network level. I went to CBS, I started doing TV and radio for them. And then I came here to Bloomberg. It's like you're always kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just me and I just can't sit still for too long. And now here I was able to expand to global, news. So it's kind of like that stepping stone, local, national, now global. And I'm just blessed. I'm thankful for the opportunities that I've been given. And it's been just an amazing experience. And I always tell people, you know what, try it. You never know, just try it. And if you don't like it, hey, then you need to go back to doing what you're doing. But at least I tried it. And I've always pushing my limits, because when I get too comfortable, I have to say, okay, let me challenge myself a little bit, like here at Bloomberg, they just, I'm now part of a new radio show that just launched, and it's challenging. And I was nervous when I started. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this, but they love to challenge me too. And it's great. And it's a wonderful, wonderful show. And I'm just learning so much and just branching out. Like I'm ready for what's next.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up as well, because it's better to try it. And if it doesn't work out, hey, at least you gave it a shot, than to go through the rest of your life saying, man, what would have happened if?
Right. Well, that's like, imagine if I would have never taken that job at WPIX, and imagine if I would have stayed, at the magazine, like, what would I be doing now? You always kind of wonder that. Yeah.
Right. It's easier said than done sometimes, but once we push ourselves, oftentimes we're so glad we did. Now, there's so much more than what's going on in your neighborhood or what's going on, merely at your doorstep. And that's the beauty of reporting on a national scale. It enhances your world perspective. So being at Bloomberg, besides a big story like the pandemic, which affected everyone, what has been a story, or what are the stories that have made you say, wow, and have changed your perspective, not just on your, within the confines of your own community, but beyond your world perspective, if you will?
I think here it's been more of, since the pandemic, like how much things that I never really looked at before, like how much the job market impacts the stock market, how much all these reports that come out impact the stock market, how much interest rates impact everything from, your mortgage to your car payment to everything, all these things that I never really thought about, how they're all interconnected and how much it impacts, everyday people like me, like you, things like that. And really being able to understand it and dissect it. And I think that was it.
So now that you've been in this position for a while, you've found your footing at Bloomberg and you're doing a great job. It's been a pleasure to follow your career. You and I are connected not only on Instagram, but on LinkedIn. So I'm seeing what you're doing all the time. And it's, like I said, it's great to follow. What's next? What's on your radar in terms of what you want to accomplish, both professionally and personally?
Wow. So I think, it's funny because I always say, my husband's always like, can you just sit still for a minute? I'm always thinking. Right now, I'm just enjoying it's Bloomberg Surveillance Radio Show. It just started. We're probably into week 2 or 3 right now. And I'm just kind of enjoying this to become just a part of it and really enjoy this ride. And then hopefully, I'll be able to freelance and do some other TV projects at the same time here, because that's the great thing, is that there are so many ways to report here. You can go radio, you can go TV, you can go digitally. Now what they're using me for a lot too is for live events. And that's something I'm looking into too, because I love public speaking. And they've noticed that here at Bloomberg, and they use me to host different conferences, worldwide panels. And it's a good break, from the everyday, I'll do my different shows, and then I get a break, and let's say for a day I'll go to Montreal and host a conference there and meet some new people and learn different things about AI or whatever the topic is. And I think that's what I'm loving, is that ability to do that. And I'd love to look into that a little bit more too, doing those live events and live experiences, because I just love engaging with people and talking with people.
When you look at your career to this point, it's been a lot. It's been over 20 years, as I said in the introduction of you. What are you proudest of to this point?
To this point, it's got to be that special in Puerto Rico, just because it meant so much to me. And it was emotional. I remember the first day we finished filming, because my visions of Puerto Rico were always going there, family vacations, and the beauty and the people and the music. And when I got there after the hurricane, seeing the devastation, I think it was hard. I remember coming back from the first day of filming, and I was in my room and I sat there and cried, because it was just a lot, because just seeing the struggle. I'll give you an example. There was one man who I interviewed. He was just standing out there, and it was just a concrete platform. And I went over to him and I said, hey, what are you doing here? Was this your home? And he said, yeah, this was my home. And I said, well, why are you here? Do you have some place to stay? And he said, no, this is my home. He's like, I built this with my two hands. And I'm just on the side, there was plywood and maybe like a little shack kind of set up. And he goes, that's where I'm living now. And I'm going to rebuild this house with my own two hands, just like how I did. He said, because this is my home. And just that in itself speaks, miles about the pride and, everything we have for the island itself and what you work for and how hard you work for everything. And yeah, it's just, it's who I am. And it was tough, but I'm glad that I got to do it. And I'm glad I got to put my personal touch into it. Which was just, that was one of the highlights of my career. And I will never forget it.
Yeah, it showed, and I could see the emotion there. And I felt it too. I have family down there. So definitely very concerned about them during that time. And same perspective, despite that, they trudge on. And that's I think it's the spirit of the Caribbean as a whole. We're too stubborn for our own good.
Yes.
I see that with the Dominican side of my family. I see it with the Puerto Rican side of my family. We're too freaking stubborn.
So true.
So true. Well, this has been great. I know you have a train to catch, but I'm going to end as I always do with the rapid fire segment. So it's 5 hit run questions from me, 5 hit run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. And here I'll give you on the first one multiple. You can choose multiple. Favorite interview or interviews you've ever done?
Oh, it was The Rock, and he's my secret crush. So it was the absolute favorite, Dwayne The Rock
Not
Johnson.
anymore.
I know.
Yeah, and he's been in the news lately. All right.
Yes,
Person you'd like to, as somebody that grew up a wrestling fan, I appreciate that. A person you'd like to interview most.
Ooh, who I would like to interview most? Oh gosh, that's a good one. I would say right now, I think it's Michelle Obama. I have her book like sitting on my shelf, and it's like, ooh, I have to like read this. I don't know. I don't know. I think she's one. Oprah's another one. I would just love to sit down and like pick her brain. Yeah, that'd be a good one. All right, third, best advice anyone ever gave you. Ooh, I don't remember who it was. I'm trying to think. But I remember people always telling me I was coming up in the business. Don't get caught up in the negativity. Because especially when social media started, when I first started in the business, there wasn't, the social media, they didn't have that, and then it came in, and then you got a lot of hate, from people. And they said, whatever comes through, just ignore it. Like, just keep pushing through. And that was one of the things. So, because we're in the public eye and not everything is nice that people say. So they said, just push through it and you'll be all right.
That's true. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Ooh, oh my gosh. Wow. And I had a show called Celebrity Tastemakers, and we went to so many restaurants. And this is so hard. Oh, you're killing me right now, Mike. I would have to say, oh gosh, sofrito. I would have to say best Puerto Rican food. And I was able to sit down there with Rita Moreno, one of my like idols who I look up to. And yeah, sofrito.
She's a legend. And lastly, advice you'd give anyone entering your profession.
The advice I usually give people is just try to be authentic to yourself. Don't try to be the anchor or the reporter. Like, speak in your voice. Don't just read and speak in your voice, because that's how people are going to gain that trust. That's how people gain the trust in me, is because I spoke in my voice. And it's hard to do at first because you're so like tight and you just want to like make sure you get it right and you want to be a professional, but relax a little, take a breather before you hit that live shot, and just say, okay, here we go. I'm Lisa. I'm talking to my friends at home and here's what happened, like it just relax a little bit and be authentically yourself.
Wise words. Thank you very much. We'll stick around. I know you got to go, but stick around. We'll talk briefly off air. Before we say goodbye to the audience, we'll be tuning into this, of course, next Monday, February 12th. This will be we're being recorded. I can't speak English today, on the 5th. Any shout outs to anyone or anything you'd like to give, Lisa?
Oh gosh, shout outs to my family. I love that. I got my husband. I have a son who's 21 who's driving me insane, but I love him anyway. And a daughter who's 15.
It's our job.
That's our job. Yeah, exactly. And a daughter who's 15 who is just, they're both the love of my life. And that's all.
All right. Shout out to everyone that will watch this or listen to it. At the time you're hearing this, it'll be a Monday. There won't be a show the Wednesday because I don't think anybody's going to be available on Valentine's Day, of course, so their significant other doesn't kill them. But the Friday to follow will be an interesting show. So like I mentioned to you guys before in the audience, trying to get the perspectives of more police and fire from around the country. This gentleman will be a good choice. He was a hazmat chief, a deputy chief down in Virginia. So for the first volume of a new miniseries we're debuting called The Best, the Bravest Nationwide, which is an offshoot of our FDNY miniseries, I'll be talking with former Virginia Deputy Chief Rick Ettinger. So that should be a good show. Be on the lookout for that. That'll be live Friday of next week, of course, the 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. In the meantime, on behalf of Lisa Mateo, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your night.